humanity stands at a crossroads. We have a choice between freedom and fear, ignorance or truth. The Great Reset?
We need a great reset.
Or the Great Freeset? The World Council for Health has emerged with a comprehensive vision. We aggregate holistic, unbiased health advice from international sources, free from the shackles of vested interests. We have united over 230 unique organizations spanning 55 countries. Powering the international health sovereignty movement, we have activated 33 autonomous country councils representing voices around the world and enabling people to make the best informed choices. We see the big picture. We have a long-term vision. We implement a broad strategy that respects individuality, ethics, and life on Earth. We're powering international opinion, and we are being heard. Welcome to a new era of enlightened health discourse, empowered by science and shared wisdom. Co-create a healthy, free, and sovereign world with us, the World Council for Health. A better way for a better world.
Good evening, buonasera, buenas noches, bonsoir, guten Abend, hello, ni hao, konnichiwa, dobry den, saibona, namaste, and a warm welcome to all from every corner of the globe to this crucial gathering of the World Council for Health. We are here united across time zones and traditions by a matter of profound and urgent human concern. In the quiet of examination rooms and the starkness of laboratory data, a new and alarming story is being written, a story of a growing shadow since 2021, a rising tide of cancer in unexpected age groups, and a pressing question that can no longer be ignored: where do we stand? Our first panel 2 weeks ago gave us a powerful voice to this alarm. We heard a clarion call from an immediate moratorium from Professor Dalgleish. We saw the sobering evidence from Professor Acevedo, Whitehouse, who mapped no fewer than 28 known pathways through which cancer could be initiated. They laid the groundwork, but the most difficult work remains, the painstaking task of moving from correlation to causation. When does a tragic coincidence become a tragic consequence? The answer lies in the meticulous language of science, in genetic sequencing, in histopathology, and in unassailable data of cancer incidence. To continue this vital search for truth, we have assembled 4 world-class international experts, each bringing a critical piece of the puzzle. It is now a profound honor to invite my amazing colleague and dear friend, Dr. Mark Drosy, to join me in hosting this essential second cancer panel. Mark, the floor is all yours to guide us through this difficult but necessary conversation.
Thank you, Christoph. Thank you very much. And it's such a pleasure to be back working together. You know, it's almost 3 years ago, Christoph, when World Council for Health, when we hosted a panel on the subject of cancer that really changed my paradigm on cancer. And at that time, we had Dr. Thomas Seyfried, revealing to us the metabolic approach to undermining cancer cells. And we had Dr. Merrick sort of pointing out some of the early work in terms of using repurposed medications. And, it's interesting, Christoph, the World Council for Health came together in light of the COVID crisis, or I think we all quite understand the COVID crimes against humanity. And in the process, so many people came together that hadn't worked together before. And in every field, medicine, science, nursing, you found that there were certain voices, certain people who were able to keep their heads and their wits and their ethics and really stand against the system, which was now, the old medical system revealing itself to be so rotted to the core that it's almost irrelevant in so many areas. And there's that element of a crisis having both danger and opportunity. And I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that since this journey began together, since the COVID operation was launched against mankind, we've been on a learning curve that I would have never anticipated, and learned so many things from each other and together that we wouldn't have. And it really does remind me that, a crisis does involve danger and opportunity. Now, of course, we've been trying to stop the COVID injections since before the first one was stuck in anyone's arm. And unfortunately, 6 billion people have been injected under false pretenses with this genetic toxin. And among the many ill effects of that, which of course does include more COVID infections and more variants, but, in much bigger sense, one of the biggest things is that people's immune systems are collapsing and cancer is on a dramatic rise. And these are cancers like we haven't seen before. And, again, Christoph, you and I can recall World Council for Health Science Committee back in 2021, surgeons on the call from Africa, pathologists from India saying, we've never seen cancers like this. They just don't look the same to the eye or the microscope. They're growing in young people. They're growing quick. Treatments aren't working. And so this is the crisis we find ourselves in. And what's exciting is this isn't all doom and gloom, because today we have with us three exceptional experts: geneticist Kevin Mc Kernan, oncologist, researcher, author Wiliam Makis, and really expert in clinical data, clinical studies, and specifically in the area of cancer, Deanna Mc Leod. And I believe what people are going to get today is a lot of information that there are solutions for cancer that were previously not tapped into and that are on the spectrum compared to just surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy, are way less toxic. And so even for people who just have old-fashioned cancer, but for the massive swell of people who now have this turbo cancer, these unusual pathologies, the old treatments are working even worse than they used to. And by the grace of God, a lot of these new treatment modalities that we're going to tap into today are actually working. So there's a lot of hope. And so I'm very excited about today's panel. And I think I won't hang on to the microphone too long because there's so much we can learn. And if it's appropriate, I'd love to introduce our first expert.
Yes, please.
Okay. So Kevin Mc Kernan, sir, you need no introduction, but we're going to introduce you anyways. You're a pioneering genomics scientist, and you're the founder of Medicinal Genomics. You've been renowned for your groundbreaking leadership in sequencing the human genome and that project, as well as the cannabis genome. And you have decades of innovation in next generation genetic sequencing. You've revolutionized DNA analysis technologies that are trusted around the world. In 2023 is when I had the honor to meet you, and that was when your own meticulous independent research uncovered residual plasmid DNA contamination in COVID-19 mRNA so-called vaccines. And this discovery has ignited the global scientific debate, and it's underscored the importance of restoring ethics and quality control and honesty between pharma and the people on the planet. You're a fearless seeker of truth, a masterful entrepreneur. You continue to advance transparency and excellence in genomics. You've earned widespread admiration for your integrity and your technical brilliance, and your unwavering to public health, especially since the launch of COVID. So, Kevin Mc Kernan, very pleased to share with our audience the insights you have for us today.
Thank you, Mark. Very kind introduction. And I think that I have a few slides here I'll walk through. But what I wanted to do with the audience today is just give you an update on where we are in the DNA contamination story and what we've done to further pin down the mechanism of action, why the regulators can't see this, what they need to change in order for them to see this, and why there are other laboratories out there that are refuting this and in many ways, I think, playing a little bit game of a dirty game of peer review semantics. So I think they're the slides. So Mark already gave you my background. I've been in this field for 30 years and built some sequencers and started some companies and sold them to various entities well known in the space. And the main focus has been in DNA isolation and in DNA sequencing. So plasmids in particular. So I do know a thing or two about plasmids. And This is going to be very pertinent as to why the TGA and I think what the FDA and the EMA are doing when they're trying to monitor this DNA. I think they have not captured the difference between a plasmid and a PCR product. And I'll show you some of the details of that. But there's a few things behind this work that are helpful to familiarize yourself with. We're using Oxford nanopore sequencing to figure out the length of these molecules. We're using RT-qPCR and fluorometry to measure how much DNA we think is there. And we're trying to put as much of this open access as we can. We do have some papers through peer review that are getting heavily attacked. And I'm going to go over that as to why they're getting attacked and what's coming behind those. We have two more papers I want to share with you. That one is a preprint form and one was just submitted yesterday. This is the speaker paper that really kicked off a lot of the controversy. And we went about measuring vials in Canada and found the limits to be most of the vials to be over the limit with fluorometry, but under the limit or right on the line with qPCR. There may have been one or two vials that were over with the SV40 DNA, but for the most part, the fluorometry was way over, and the qPCR was close to the threshold, and that leads people to question why. Why are these giving you different results, and what are the regulators using? Well, the important distinction here, I think, from a cancer background is that these regulations are all based on naked DNA and injections, and we know that has a 10-minute half-life when it's injected in a traditional vaccine. But when you wrap these in a lipid nanoparticle, we don't know the lifespan, and we're beginning to think it's months to years. The papers keep rolling out showing DNA or RNA persistence long past the 48 hours that they promised. And we're finding it in cerebral arteries. We're finding it in heart tissue. We're finding it in placenta. There's people finding it in plasma. They're finding it in breast milk. So it is getting everywhere. And it shouldn't be there. And people are beginning to ask why. So how this happened, I think most people are familiar with by now. So I won't go into great detail on this. There's a good paper in the BMJ from Josh Gutzkow and Retzev Levy. Retzev is now on the ACIP committee. But there are two different processes that occurred. There's one for the clinical trial, which had one type of contaminant, and then they switched once they got approval to a different process that led to different types of DNA contaminants. And I'll touch on each of those and why they're having a hard time measuring them. These are the plasmids that were disclosed. The plasmid on the right is what was disclosed to the EMA. And you'll see there's a big section I've highlighted there in red that was never annotated. And when you take that sequence, after you've found this DNA and you sequence it, you'll realize there's a bunch of other SV40 components in it that were curiously deleted from their annotation maps. That's had to be intentional because these software tools don't annotate in a directed manner like this. Someone had to go in and delete those annotations and submit this file. So there's something there they don't want you to see. And I would argue it's the SV40 components that they're most afraid of being public because the literature on those is fairly damning. These parts of these sequences have contaminated the polio vaccines and other vaccines in the past. Okay, so the TGA is claiming to be looking at the kanamycin resistance gene. If I go back a slide, you'll see the kanamycin resistance gene is highlighted over here as NEO in CAN on the left-hand side around 9 o'clock on that map. And that's what they're measuring to figure out how much DNA is left behind. It's odd that they're looking in one place, and it's odd that they're looking in that place, in particular during the process 1 clinical trials, because that region was not there. What happens in the process 1 is they took those plasmids and they PCR amplified just the spike region of the plasmid, not the kanamycin region. And the TGA is running around measuring the kanamycin region after they amplified the spike region. They're not looking at the region they amplified. So this is a real hide the ball game that's going on. And that's one reason why the regulators are claiming all this stuff meets the limit. It's fine because they're measuring the pre-amplified product, not the amplified product. Now, when this got into process 2, this changed because in process 2, they didn't amplify the spike region. They took the whole plasmid through, and now the kanamycin region should be the same copy number as the spike, and maybe that assay would suffice. What our most recent paper has demonstrated is that they use a DNase, an enzyme, to remove this DNA, but it fails to remove the spike DNA because it is coated in the RNA that's in the shot. There's something known as an RNA-DNA hybrid. When you make RNA off of DNA, it's actually stuck to the RNA, to the DNA template. And now you have a strand of half RNA, half DNA, and the nucleases don't destroy that. At least DNase 1 does not destroy that. And so it destroys the canned region quite well, but does not destroy the spike region. And the spike region is what's sticking around. This kind of sounds familiar to anyone who's been looking at the nucleic acid persistence data. It's the spike region everyone's looking at. And that's what we're finding in the patients months to years later. So this mechanism of action, we've now sorted out and submitted a paper that demonstrates if you use a different nuclease, like DNase 1 XT from New England Biolabs, it will destroy both forms of DNA. And this is clearly a poor selection of nucleases. They should have known this. This is published in the literature that the enzyme they're using does not destroy RNA-DNA hybrids. So that is a bit peculiar. So this is a bit of a schematic of why the regulators can't see this, is they're measuring that CAN region with PCR, and everyone else who goes and measures the spike region finds a much higher CT. It's often 6 to 7 CTs offset, which is about 100-fold to 200-fold over the limit if you measure with the appropriate PCR or fluorometry tools. So they're using one assay. It's a bit of a cherry pick, and they would not allow us to use a single assay to measure COVID, but when it comes to measuring the product from their sponsor, they are quite happy looking in one narrow place and ignoring everything else. Now, folks should know that inside the EMA documents, there is a spike qPCR assay that is validated, and they are not sharing what information they get from that assay. It's there. They're only giving quantitative results off of the other assay, and I think we all now know why. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead to many slides. If people want to see the other slides that are in this deck, I presented on this in the Netherlands not too long ago, which will have these, but I don't have time to hit on them all. I really want to focus on what's going on with this paper now in peer review. The process of peer review has attacked this, of course, and there's another aspect as to why I think they've intensified their attack, is that through the process of sequencing these vaccines with Oxford Nanopore, we have unveiled the methylation signals on this DNA. And when DNA is methylated by bacteria, it leaves a different signature of methyl A and methyl C on that DNA, and that signals to your cells that DNA is foreign, and it triggers an interferon response through a pathway known as cGAS sting. We can now see that the DNA that went through these plasmids at Pfizer are methylated in this manner, which means they're hyperstimulatory to the cGAS sting pathway. So we published this preprint, and the attacks intensified. This particular paper can see that the DNA that went through E. coli is methylated on some C's and some A's. And that has been published to be hyperstimulatory to cGAS sting, but there's also literature published in the plasmid manufacturing literature to not do this because of its stimulatory behavior. There are E. coli strains out there that don't do this, and they were not used. So when they switched from process 1 to process 2, they did it very hastily and used the wrong E. coli strains. And now this DNA we know is not just present and oftentimes long, it is also hyperstimulatory to the cGAS sting pathway. The cGAS sting pathway I like to draw out because a lot of people will point to integration as being a risk, which may in fact be true. We don't have hard evidence of that happening yet. We're very suspicious it is because of the persistence data we're seeing. However, it doesn't need to go that far. The moment DNA gets into the cytosol, you can trigger this pathway, and Kwan et al. Has a nice paper demonstrating if you hit this pathway repeatedly, you can trigger cancer. So this paper will go through the different read lengths and different fragment sizes that we saw. It's currently still just a preprint. These are some methylation maps that we've built of this from the Oxford Nanopore system. And the other data that we were able to derive from this is we're able to see that another step in their process, which is to actually linearize this plasmid, was failing. Not surprising that they were failing to use the right DNAs. They also failed to run this particular step to completion. This is pertinent because this particular plasmid Pfizer is using is replication competent in mammalian cells. And the way to stop it from being replication competent, or at least to slow it down, is to linearize it, is to cut it so it's no longer a circle. So you want to make sure this step is done completely. Otherwise, that plasmid will not only replicate in cells, it could spread and it could shed. So this is this particular plasmid can grow in E. coli and in humans, and a plasmid just like this actually leaked out of a lab in Seattle. The Beck et al. Paper shows that a pcDNA 3.1 plasmid that is very similar to this plasmid infected everyone in the lab and got out to their housemates carrying a nucleocapsid express protein. All right, so this step needs to go to completion. It's not. We can see this with the Oxford nanopore data, that these reads that you can see that are all in gray here, horizontal lines, show that they failed to cut this site. So there are potentially replication competent plasmids in some of the vials. I want to be cognizant of time here. I didn't hit a timer. I'll leave you with a few last slides here. We're now finding 5,000 base pair fragments in some of the vials we got from Mc Kernan out in Japan. This is a bit of a shocker for us. These are some of the most contaminated vials we've ever seen, and the numbers coming in on this are still recording with multiple methods, PCR included. They're even failing on PCR with these lots. Usually PCR is right at the limit. With PCR in these lots, they're over by an order of magnitude. So the lots do vary in terms of their contamination rate. We don't yet have a good correlation to adverse events because the lot sizes are currently semi-unknown. We don't have all of the lot sizes, so it's hard to draw those correlations at the moment. We're hoping to get our hands on some of that in the future. Okay, I will end this just by giving you what you're going to see in the news about these papers. Retraction Watch has gone after us. We've also had some people at PubSmear run around and fabricate information out of our paper, submit this to the journal to get it into investigation mode. We have evidence that they fabricated this data, and some of these people at PubSmear even admitted to fabricating the data on record. But very recently, just this weekend, there's the evidence of the fabrication. I won't go into the great detail there. Another hit has come through where our peer reviews at Taylor and Francis, we wish they were open for everyone to read, but they're not. Unfortunately, they're confidential. But one of the reviewers decided to share them and break confidentiality with Retraction Watch. This is the reviewer, and it turns out they're not very good at IT because they forgot to scrub their name from the metadata in the PDF file, and we figured out who they are, and they happen to have funding from the same agency that funds BioNTech. So this individual, Ralph, has come after our paper and leaked all of the peer reviews, only his side of it, not ours. Ours are still held confidential by the journal, to try to basically tear down the paper. Now, there's a history of this happening. I left some of these remarks in here for those because you'll see the comments here are ad hominem attacks. They're calling us anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theorists and grifters and all that. And their arguments are citing fact checkers. So not very strong arguments. But this has been done before. And it turns out the same individual went after Bridget Koning's paper, where they went to MDPI, complained about it. MDPI said, all right, fine, let's have a back and forth, a civil debate. Koning presented her comments and arguments, and then this Kaiser lab ran off and refused the debate and put their arguments to preprint. So there are tactics here that they use, which is to harass the journals, and when you actually push them for a debate, they end up running away. So you'll expect more noise on this in the next few weeks because I suspect the journal is getting a little tired of this drama and is going to probably put an end to it. One way or the other, it'll either get retracted or it will just persist. But it has been downloaded more times than any article at that journal. So I think it's been read by now and people have their hands on it. I'll leave time for questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Kevin. Your work is so essential to the world, really. And, you know, these things that would have been passed by us. And as you've shown, not only is there, I guess, negligent work, but there's obviously a strong effort to, you know, keep certain realities from the public as a dishonesty. And so your honesty and your courage are greatly appreciated. We're going to hold Q&A with all our experts to the end. And so I'm pleased to introduce our next expert, my friend, Dr. Wiliam Makis, who is a triple board certified medical oncologist, diagnostic radiologist, and a nuclear medicine specialist. He's a graduate of the prestigious University of Toronto before the Great Fall. He built a renowned clinical career, ultimately serving as the head of the General Nuclear Medicine Division for Alberta Health Services and assistant professor at the University of Alberta. However, no surprise, over the last 5 to 10 years, it is actually his profound commitment to patient safety and scientific truth that truly defines his recent work. And when he was confronted with unprecedented medical data, Dr. Makis demonstrated that beautiful, rare quality of honesty in medicine, intellectual courage. And he's actually transitioned not only from a top clinical clinician to become an independent investigator, dedicating himself entirely to analyzing population-level data, sounding alarms on what he's identified as significant and overlooked public health risks. Through his meticulous data-driven research, he's become a clarion voice for medical ethics, informed consent, and the unwavering pursuit of truth, standing before us today not just as a doctor, but as a dedicated advocate for humanity, unafraid to challenge orthodoxies on the mission to protect patients and promote a more transparent and accountable medical system. Just to, the journey that you've been on, Dr. Makis, over the last few years has brought you to a point where you are now the largest ivermectin and repurposed medication cancer clientele being served in the world. You're clearly a top cancer researcher in the world. You're one of the top 3 medical substacks in the world. And you've really owned global admiration, and you've had a powerful impact for many people suffering from cancer, and especially the big landslide of cancer following the genetic COVID shot. So, Dr. Makis, thank you very much for joining us, and I am all ears, looking forward to learning.
Thank you, Dr. Shorzy, and thank you, World Council for Health. I wanted to give you just a very brief introduction and a background history of COVID vaccine-induced turbo cancers, because we still get attacked on this phenomenon, which is very real. We still get attacked by mainstream medicine, by mainstream oncology, claiming that this is an invented term, this is an invented phenomenon, that this is not happening, despite the fact that we see thousands of COVID vaccinated individuals of all ages coming down with these extremely aggressive cancers that have been coined turbo cancer. And so I really want to highlight the pioneers in this field. And we have one of them here today, Dr. Ute Krüger, who first raised the concern in September of 2021 when she started seeing very aggressive cancers in the COVID vaccinated. She brought this to the attention to a pathology conference in Germany, and Dr. Arne Burkhardt, a pathologist in Germany. And so these concerns were raised back in late 2021. I also want to give recognition to Dr. Ryan Cole, pathologist in the United States, who started raising these concerns, I believe, in 2022, when he was seeing extremely aggressive cancers in his lab. I raised these concerns in September of 2022 when I saw extremely aggressive cancers in a fully vaccinated population, and this was Canadian doctors. I started tracking the deaths of fully vaccinated Canadian doctors really back in December of 2021, when I first saw my colleagues who were starting to die suddenly after they took their booster shot. We had the booster shot rollout. By then, every single Canadian doctor had to have at least 2 shots to be able to continue working. So we had really 100% vaccinated population, except those people who got fake vaccine cards, of course. And so I noticed the sudden deaths starting after the first booster shot in late 2021. But the aggressive cancers I really only noticed in the summer of 2022. In fact, we had one hospital in Canada, Trillium Health in Mississauga, Ontario, that had 3 Canadian doctors die from cancer within a span of 2 days of each other. That's 3 doctors in the same hospital die of cancer within 2 days. They tried to cover it up. They tried to bury it, but the healthcare staff of that hospital leaked that information to the public. And so I warned the Canadian Medical Association at that time that not only were we seeing sudden deaths in the COVID vaccinated, but we were seeing extremely aggressive cancers, and some of these doctors were very young. In fact, I saw it in medical students in their 20s, medical residents in their 30s, staff doctors in their 40s. And so these aggressive cancers have come to be coined turbo cancer just by their very nature. And we've seen publications in turbo cancer really increase, especially in the past year. We've seen an Italian study of 300,000 people show us an increase incidence of cancers in the COVID vaccinated, up to 60% increased incidence of cancers. And there's been a very large study published recently, a South Korean paper of 8.4 million people This is the National Health Registry of South Korea, showing increased cancer risk between 20 to 70% in the COVID vaccinated. About 3/4 of that population was vaccinated. Compared to the unvaccinated population, there was a significantly increased risk of cancer shown in the South Korean study. This was published about 2 months ago. Now that study is under attack. There's pressure to get that study retracted. And so as Kevin Mc Kernan said, all these papers that are showing an association between the COVID vaccines and cancer, and the South Korean study really showed that it's not just the mRNA vaccines that are the problem. The mRNA vaccines were showing about a 20% risk, but the DNA-based vaccines, AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, were showing about a 40% increase incidence in cancer. And of course, people who mixed and matched their vaccines, you got your 2 AstraZeneca shots, maybe you got a Pfizer booster and then a Moderna booster, are showing about a 30-35% increased risk of cancer in that study as well. And so this is a real phenomenon. There's more and more publications that are coming out showing that this is a real phenomenon. Now, you will not find these papers if you search for the term turbo cancer, because it's not a medical term. This is a sort of a colloquial term that has arisen on social media platforms. And so one of the attacks that we face is that turbo cancer is not a real thing. Of course, we get attacked with community notes on Twitter. I've been harassed for 2 years. Every single post I post about cancer and COVID vaccines, there's a community note posted that this is an invented term. This is made up by anti-vaxxers. And of course, they use fact checks as their sources, like Reuters or USA Today. But so you will not find these under the term turbo cancer. But if you search in PubMed or Google Scholar and you search for cancer and COVID vaccines or mRNA vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna vaccines, you will find these papers. And there are now, I would say, probably over 100 papers that are examining the potential mechanisms. Of course, with the incredible work of Kevin Mc Kernan, 2023 was, the key year when we found out about the DNA contamination of the vaccines as one of the, major factors. And the fact that all the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines and their boosters, they all have this problem of contamination. And so that really put a lot of fuel on a fire in terms of being able to now look at potential mechanisms of how these cancers are arising. Just to briefly give you an idea of what these turbo cancers are, there's probably about 20 plus mechanisms by which these vaccines may be causing these extremely aggressive cancers. I believe this is a brand new pathophysiology. I don't believe that we've seen these cancers before, and these are similar to very aggressive cancers we've seen in the past. I believe we have a brand new pathology here that we have to deal with, and that oncologists are not recognizing and not realizing what they're dealing with and why they are struggling with COVID vaccinated patients who develop these cancers. These cancers are showing up in very young populations, and we are seeing cancers in young populations that we should never see. And I'll give you a couple of examples of this. We see 20-year-olds develop breast cancer, stage 4 breast cancer. Now, we're not catching these at stage 1 or stage 2. They're almost always being diagnosed at stage 3 or stage 4 because of the rapid nature of the growth of these cancers. Breast cancer identified in 20-year-olds. We've almost never seen that. In the past, this would be someone with a very serious family history, of course, BRCA1 mutation or other genetic mutations, but we wouldn't see this in dozens and dozens of individuals previously healthy, no family history. Colon cancer in 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds. We've never seen stage 4 colon cancers present in this manner and in these age groups. And one particular example that's really shocking for me is cholangiocarcinoma, for example. Now, these are cancers of the gallbladder and the biliary tree, and the average age for these cancers is 70. Average age is about 70 years old. This is a cancer of the elderly, and I am seeing 20-year-olds present with stage 4 cholangiocarcinomas where the median age is 70. And so that gives you an idea of how big the age shift is towards the younger population. And I'm really concerned about kids who've had these COVID-19 vaccines, because there are now over 20 documented cases in VAERS, in the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, of children developing cancer after taking one or more Pfizer or Moderna vaccines. And these 20 cancer cases are mostly lymphomas, leukemias, sarcomas, cancers that we're seeing in young adults as well after COVID vaccination. So just a couple of features of turbo cancers, and then I'll move on to how we can deal with these cancers and some of the promising approaches. The features of these turbo cancers are, so young population, very late presentation, usually stage 4 presentation. And this for me was the biggest red flag, and the biggest shocker was stage 4 presentations in an 18-year-old, 20-year-old, 22-year-old. This is something I'd never seen in my career, and I'm sure most doctors who are honest, with themselves would admit the same thing, is we've never seen stage 4 presentations in young people, and so many of them. And I think part of the reason is that these vaccines were pushed. They were mandated on college-age students, university students. Some of these students were 18, 19 years old. Now they're 20 years old and coming in with stage 4 cancers. And they were also pushed on high school kids, especially kids who wanted to play sports, play hockey, for example. In Canada, we had mandates. Ages 12 and up had to get at least 2 shots to be able to play sports, to be able to enter sports arenas. And so this was an attack on young people. This was an attack on children. And now these young people, these children, are suffering these extremely aggressive cancers we've never seen. So stage 4 presentation, very rapid growth. And so sometimes you will see the surgeons will try to cut these cancers out, thinking that they're going to be able to contain them. And then the patient's re-imaged after surgery and the cancer has spread. And it has spread rapidly through many organs of the body, whether it's, to the liver, to the brain, to the bones. So very, very aggressive spread for these cancers. And another very important feature is they are resistant to conventional treatments. They're resistant to conventional chemotherapy. They're resistant to radiotherapy, and even immunotherapies, cutting-edge immunotherapies. They're resistant to these conventional treatments. We don't know why they are resistant, but what oncologists are finding is that they cannot control these cancers. Okay, they struggle to control them, and even if they put the patient into remission with very aggressive chemotherapy, that remission doesn't last long. It may last a few months. The cancer comes roaring back, and very poor prognosis in these cancers. So what we're finding is that these patients are dying 3 months after diagnosis, 6 months after diagnosis. And the oncologists are telling their families, you're going to live another 2 years, 5 years, maybe even 10 years, with our cutting edge cancer treatments. And these patients are dying within months. And so there's a certain sense of urgency here. We need to, first of all, identify and verify the problem. And that's why Kevin Mc Kernan and David Speaker's work is so important in getting to this, to the bottom of this, the genetic contamination, DNA contamination, and so on. But we need to identify the problem before we can start, identifying solutions, because these patients are dying. And so mainstream oncology is ignoring this phenomenon. And these patients have a very, very poor prognosis. A lot of them are dying, I would say, needlessly, because the problem is being ignored and it's being suppressed. Now, in the past 2 years, I've been working with thousands of cancer patients with antiparasitics. Antiparasitics like ivermectin, fenbendazole, mebendazole, niclosamide, nitazoxanide, hydroxychloroquine, for example. And each of these antiparasitics has an effect on cancer, a very strong effect. In fact, if you put in AI search engines, if you prompt AI, for example, Perplexity AI or even Grok, and you prompt them for what are the most promising repurposed drugs for aggressive cancer, for terminal cancer, you will find in the top 10 at least 3 or 4 or 5 antiparasitic drugs that are in the top 10, usually in the top 5, as the most promising, because they are very powerful. They have multiple mechanisms by which they attack cancer. Ivermectin, for example, attacks cancer stem cells, something that chemo doesn't. Chemo ignores cancer stem cells, which is why chemo is not curative in 95% of cases. ivermectin will inhibit and kill cancer stem cells. It will also reverse resistance to chemotherapy. And so in some of these turbo cancer cases where patients are not responding to chemotherapy, I'm seeing that when you add ivermectin to their chemotherapy regimens, they actually become responsive to the chemo again, and you see tumor shrinking, and sometimes you see dramatic tumor shrinkage when you combine these antiparasitics with chemo. Fenbendazole and mebendazole is a different family of antiparasitics, and what they do is they actually stimulate the production of p53, so they increase the levels of p53, and one of the things that we've learned about one of the potential mechanisms in turbo cancer is the spike protein attacks p53. It can damage p53, reduce p53 levels. And so there is a potential mechanism here by which these antiparasitics are actually reversing that damage. And p53 is a tumor suppressor protein. Why is it important? p53 stimulates the cancer cells to undergo apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. So it actually stimulates the killing of cancer cells. Another fascinating feature of fenbendazole and mebendazole is that they block the uptake of glucose by cancer cells. So they, in fact, cut off the fuel for cancer cells, which cancer cells love glucose. And so they'll block glucose transport channels to actually starve these cancers. And regardless of whether these cancers are in an unvaccinated or vaccinated individual, that effect seems to persist. So these antiparasitics are being heavily attacked and are being suppressed. Every time I mention ivermectin, mebendazole, fenbendazole, and I have hundreds of success stories, I get attacked. I get attacked by mainstream doctors and mainstream oncologists. And just going back to what Kevin Mc Kernan said about this phenomenon of trying to retract papers, get good papers retracted. I've had this happen to me very recently. We published recently a paper on fenbendazole, 3 cases of stage 4 cancer patients who had failed 3 or 4 or 5 lines of chemotherapy and mainstream oncology regimens. These cancer patients were dying. They took fenbendazole and they became cancer-free, and we followed them up and up to 3 years, and they stayed cancer-free for up to 3 years. So we had 3 cases. We published this paper a few months ago. This was only the second paper published on the antiparasitic fenbendazole in the past 5 years with human cases. The first one was published by Stanford University in 2021. And so they had published 3 cases in 2021. We published 3 cases in 2025. Within a month or 2 of the publication of our paper, now it passed peer review and it was published, we were attacked by the editor of the paper, who's actually the president of the City of Hope Cancer Centers in the United States, in Atlanta, Chicago, and Phoenix. This was Dr. Maurice Markman, president of City of Hope. So a big-time oncologist with a lot of big pharma funding behind him. He said he's going to pull the paper. And they didn't have a good reason to pull the paper. In fact, the reason that they were putting was that I was giving medical advice to other cancer patients with fenbendazole, and so that was some kind of a conflict of interest. And because that wasn't declared in the way they liked, that they were going to pull the paper. And so this is an attack. We're going to see these attacks not just on Kevin Mc Kernan and David Speaker's work in trying to make the link between COVID vaccines and these turbo cancers, but even those of us who are going to try to treat these patients and help these patients and try to get that work published with antiparasitics and these turbo cancers, we're being attacked, and our papers are being attacked for retraction as well. So I want to wrap it up there. Just a brief introduction, and we'll do the Q&A after.
Well, Wiliam Makis, thank you so very much. It's such a relief to have what I think we would call a chaste scientist among us in the age of so much medical and scientific prostitution, as you've revealed, as well as our previous speaker. So thanks for keeping it up. We have 2 more excellent speakers to come, and before I go to that, I'd just like to remind folks, the World Council for Health, we've been in this fight. We stepped into the gap And when I say we, I mean a lot of us, and that includes a lot of you out there around the world. But the World Council for Health stepped into the gap between humanity and essentially a murderous plot. And we continue to fill that gap, and building a better way and delivering solutions for health. We run on a shoestring budget. Almost every single person you see, with very few exceptions at World Council for Health, are completely voluntarily, and that includes myself and Christoph Blota. And even those working are working, on a very lean budget. So please, if you can, help make calls for donations. If you can, please find your way to worldcouncilforhealth.org and make a donation or become a sponsor to help us continue this important work. And of course, most importantly, please help get these information to the people that need the solutions, because that's what all of us are living for, is to help people. This is continuing the oath and the mission of healthcare. Our next speaker is going to be by a recorded presentation, and this is Dr. Ute Krüger, who I believe the term turbo cancer, which Dr. Makis mentioned too, was actually originally uttered by Dr. Krüger, and that shows how long she's been in this fight with us in defense of mankind. She's a German-trained, Swedish-based pathology specialist with 25 years of professional experience. She's worked as a consultant physician at the Swedish hospitals in Växjö and Kalmar for the past 18 years, primarily as a breast cancer specialist. For 4 years, she also served as medical director of the pathology department in Växjö. During the last 8 years of her career as a pathologist, she was involved in breast cancer research at the University of Lund alongside her clinical work at Kalmar Hospital, and this resulted in multiple publications. In the autumn of 2021, she noticed changes in the daily clinical examinations that seemed to be related to the coronavirus vaccinations. She then coined the term turbo cancer, and in recent years, she's been in close contact and exchange with colleagues worldwide regarding these changes after the so-called corona vaccination. She's helped to publish the novel findings after coronavirus so-called vaccinations made by Professor Burkhardt and Professor Lang in the book Vaccinated, Dead, Histopathological Findings Following COVID-19 Vaccination. So with no further ado, I'm very pleased and grateful to Dr. Ute Krüger for this message to the world.
Hello and welcome to a very important interview that I'm very proud of because Ute Krüger. Hello, Ute.
Hello, Christoph.
Yeah.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, it's we met in Austria, and I was thoroughly impressed by your knowledge and also by your personality. So I guess the followers that will take a look at this interview will subscribe to that. You've had many years of experience in histopathology, meaning looking under a microscope to examine the tissues of the body. You have specialized in pathologies like breast cancer, and something changed for you in 2021. Can you tell us about your observation and the publishing of your book with the works of Professor Arne Burkhardt?
Yes, I would
all
like
yours.
to do this.
Yeah.
Thank you. I can share my screen. I hope you can see this.
Perfect.
Very good. Yes, I worked as a pathologist for 25 years. And in the last 18 years, I worked in Sweden as a senior consultant and breast cancer specialist. In the last 8 years of my clinical work, I was even in the breast cancer research in Lund University. And with this experience from my clinical work and also from the research, I knew approximately the distribution of the average age, the tumor size, and the degree of malignancy that I could expect in the daily input material of breast cancer. And here you can see my working place in Kalmar, the last I worked at. And already in autumn 2021, I had this impression that I was suddenly receiving more material from younger patients, often 30 to 55 years old. that the tumors were growing more aggressively and faster, and that they were larger, and more than 4 centimeters was not uncommon. I saw tumors up to 16 centimeters. That's this size. It's very big. And I had also the impression that there were more multifocal tumors and more bilateral tumors in both breasts. And I called these tumors for turbo cancer. And another anomaly I think I saw was recurrences. There were patients who have had breast cancer before and were more or less considered cured. And it could be carcinomas from 20 years ago. And relatively soon after this shot against COVID-19, the tumor growth exploded, and there was a pronounced spread of the tumor in the body, and some of the patients died within a few months. My efforts at the second pathology conference in Germany in December 2021 to find colleagues to help me prove or disprove my hypothesis of turbo cancer after these shots against COVID-19 met with little response. And I have tried to raise awareness for this issue through lectures and interviews. Among other things, I was in Stockholm for a major conference in January 2023, and my lecture is included in this book here. From 2021 to 2023, I've been in contact with Professor Arne Burkhardt. He was also at this conference. And here you have his picture. He was an experienced and respected pathologist. He had looked at 89 cases of deceased individuals after this COVID-19 shots, together with his colleague, Professor Walter Lang. And in the most of cases, the pathologist could find a link between the shots and the death. Arne Burkhardt and I talked about the importance to publish this data on this conference. And in May 2023, our dear colleague died suddenly in an accident. And I was shocked. And there was no other pathologist who could publish his findings. And then I wrote in the condolence book that I will do everything to publish Arne's important findings. It took me more than 1 year to look at the material and to look again at the slides. There were hundreds and hundreds of slides to look at for choosing the best ones to have in this book. And this histopathological atlas is completely unique because the findings have never previously been presented in book form. It came out in August 2024 in German and in August 2025 in English and Swedish. And the English version I have sent to Mr. Kennedy too. And the book will be published in Spanish and French as well. And I hope it will be in the beginning of 2026. And I would like to thank all the people who have supported me financially, and a big thank you for the doctors who helped me to translate this book into the different languages. And if you look at this website, you can even find interviews in different languages. There were common findings after this COVID-19 injections. In more than 50%, we could see myocarditis. In nearly 90%, we could see vasculitis, partly associated with thrombi and or hemorrhage. And there were increased lymphocytic infiltrates in the organs, like an autoimmune reaction. And in several cases, we could find a deposit of uncertain origin that we never seen before. Then we could see amyloid-like deposits. Amyloid is a faulty protein that leads, for instance, to vascular occlusion. And we could find a destruction of elastic fibers. And this was both in the skin and in the vessels, in the blood vessels. And last but not least, this turbo cancer, but there is no case in the book because the patient who die in cancer are usually not autopsied. And I want to show you one case from this book. It's a tragic case of a 16-year-old girl, and she died 26 days after the second injection. And she wanted to go to a school trip and couldn't go without these injections. And her mother did not want her to take the injections, but she understood her daughter. And the girl took these shots, and after the second injection, she didn't feel well. And the 8th day after the shot, the second shot, she collapsed at the kitchen table. And her mother, who worked in the health service, tried to revive her, but the daughter did not recover and died in the hospital 26 days after this injection. And you can see here, can you see my row?
Yes.
Yeah. And you can see here, this is the heart muscle of this girl. And in this area, it's a little bit lighter. Here, there you see this rows. And this is myocardium, a massive necrosis. And if you look at the magnification, you can see here, can you see this two?
Yes.
Yeah, and here you see the dark dots, and these are lymphocytes and inflammatory cells, and this is a picture of myocarditis. And here in the upper part, you see loose scar. And the heart looked like this in numerous places, and such massive necrosis is no longer compatible with life. And in this book, there are 57 case reports. And if we look at the structure of the book, there is first the picture section with the general findings and then each organ in detail. And I've tried to mark in the pictures and describe here in this text to people who don't used to look at this histological slides to understand a little bit. And in the second part, we have this case reports. And if you look here at this case 128, I did it that I had the short overview. You have the age, 29 year, female, 1 times Comirnaty, and 21 days after the shot was the death. And then you can see history of that and vaccination. And the medical history. Then the autopsy, the first description, and then the second pathohistological examination. And this did the two pathologists, German pathologists, Professor Anne Burkhardt and Professor Walter Lang. And in the last sentence, you can see I have tried to show it a little bit easier. The COVID-19 vaccination almost certainly led to cardiac death, so that you can see directly is it linked or not to these shots. And after this COVID years, I couldn't stay in this healthcare system because I got a feeling that the system is not there to make people healthy, but to make money. And my job also felt pointless. And diagnosing cancer that other colleagues possibly caused by an injection. And so I have resigned in autumn 2023. And now I'm employed as a president of a non-profit scientific association. And in this, we primarily concerned with the prevention of diseases. And perhaps people would like to support the association with a donation, and those also promote the translation of the book into Spanish and French. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was a very powerful, not only a personal story, but looking at the fact that still people, I think the latest figure in Germany is of the so-called recognized cases of fatalities. I would call them so people that have been damaged by this injection. It's not even 3% of the ones that had the luck to be labeled as a vaccine injury, whilst we know that this number is completely underreported. And looking at your profession, in which at the beginning nobody dared, or it was even prohibited to look at slides to make any autopsies, there are still only a few people worldwide in your profession that actually do look at pre and post, or just unfortunately only post vax damages. Why do you think this is still the case with so many years that have passed since?
Yes, maybe it's because the other colleagues also took the shots, and they won't know the reality. And yes, I had cases in the hospital I worked as. There was a 21-year-old guy who got lung cancer. 21, no smoker, healthy life, and he got lung cancer. And then I said, we had this in the conference with all the doctors and pathologists, and I said, why he has this cancer, aggressive cancer, with 21 years? That's not normal. Yes, it is a genetic problem. They don't like to go through the whole history, and they don't like to see it.
And could you, just for the people out there listening, could you actually prove through staining or other techniques that you have in your pocket that there is a causal effect when it comes to cancer of the injections?
Yes, I would like to do this, but the problem was you need two antibodies. That's a special staining in pathology, and you need in this time we only had spike protein and then this nucleocapsid, and nucleocapsid is in the virus body, and the spike protein is on the surface. And if you have both nucleocapsid and spike protein, it has to be the virus infection. But if you only have the spike protein, it must be linked to the shots. And I would like to have these antibodies in our clinic, but my chief said, no, we don't need it. So I couldn't look at this.
And just one last question. Do you know anybody who's doing this?
Yes, sure. I have a colleague in Germany, Michael Merz in Dresden, and he looks at this.
And can we expect some conclusions, publications from him in the near future?
I think he had one publication, and I think there is another one he's writing at this. I think there is more to look at. And I also published one case report And there I sent it to a new university to look at this, but it was not cancer. It was so-called Guillain-Barré syndrome, and was paralysis in the body. And I published this as a case report. And if you like, I can send you the link.
Yes, please. Yes, that would be great.
Yeah.
Well, so thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your authenticity in the last few years. Thank you for everything you're doing now. I think you have a wonderful project there, and hopefully many viewers will support you now, because I think it's a project well worth promoting. And I have the feeling it won't be the last interview with you, because there's still lots to talk about. So thank you very much for your time, and all the best for your next steps.
Thank you, Christoph.
Yeah.
Well, Christoph, thank you so much for that interview. And of course, thank you to Dr. Krüger for all that information and having that interview. Wish she could be with us today, but she certainly has contributed. And maybe we'll end up having to forward her some of the questions that may come up. Well, we're gifted to have one more speaker today, another hero of the COVID war from my part of Turtle Island and the northern half of North America. And that's Deanna Mc Leod, who is the principal and founder of Kaleidoscope Strategic, an independent medical research firm that supports Canadian clinicians in preparing world-class evidence-based reviews that advance patient care nationally and internationally. Translation, she is a master of coalescing large amounts of research, putting it together and looking for practical solutions that can lead clinical work. The Kaleidoscope team brings a collective over 40 years experience in developing evidence-based peer-reviewed publications that guide cancer care, alongside decades of experience working with medical research, marketing, sales arms of pharma. So Deanna really has an eye into a lot of things that are related to this. In March of 2021, Deanna launched COVID Sense. Thank you for that. You saved many lives. And that was an initiative to equip non-scientists with the skills to interpret COVID data and make informed consents. Later that year, she joined the Canadian COVID Care Alliance, which of course is an amazing Canadian independent association of doctors and scientists that stood up against the mis and disinformation. So with no further ado, I would like to bring forth really an expert in clinical data and analysis, Deanna Mc Leod, and looking forward to what you have to share today.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. Just going to see here if I can share my screen. I see my slides there. Oh, there we go. All right. And back and forth. So I'm coming here today to chat about an initiative that we've undertaken in collaboration with Canadian Citizens Care Alliance, the We Can Do Better campaign. And I just want to thank all of the previous speakers for their amazing contributions to the discovery of the rise of cancer following COVID-19 vaccination. And this is a little bit of our journey in bringing this information to actual treating medical oncologists in Canada, and documenting the discoveries as we dug into administrative and medical databases in Ontario to try and find some answers as to what is happening. So this We Can Do Better campaign is on the Canadian Citizens Care Alliance website. And we also have wecandoBetterTogether.org if you want to find out more information about this. We've written a 37-page white paper, which has all the references that you can imagine in terms of documenting what I'm going to be presenting to you today. So I think we've already had the introduction. So right into our publication. So in May 2025, we published our findings on changes in female cancer diagnostic billing codes from the Ontario Health Insurance Plan database. And what we saw was overall a decrease in cancer diagnosis in 2020, and then a concerning rise in cancer billings related to female cancers in 2021 and 2022. And so this is our pinned tweet on COVID Sense. And it's basically had 92,000 views at this point. And we're really hoping that with more views, we can really get this information out there. We particularly focused on female cancers because one of the things that we noticed when we were looking over various databases was that there were more side effects following COVID-19 vaccination in women than men, which is something that's very unusual. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to find answers. And so we thought if we could harvest data from OHIP, which is represents 16 million residents in Ontario, which is a very large province in Canada, we could really gain some insights into what's actually happening and to see if we can document any changes in cancer rates, incidence, et cetera, from this. And so unfortunately, one of the problems with data harvesting in Ontario or in Canada are that quality data takes time to come to fruition. So administrative data is fairly timely, although some would argue is less reliable. And one of the things that has to be considered when you're looking at diagnostic data or billing data is that the diagnostic code that's assigned to the visit. So if a physician goes to visit, if a patient has a cancer concern, a woman has a cancer concern, she visits her doctor, potentially about abnormal bleeding, potentially about a lump. Basically that doctor, if they suspect that it's cancer, would assign a diagnostic code of invasive breast cancer to that. They could assign a number of other codes, but it is very possible that they could assign a breast cancer diagnosis on the first visit. So when we're looking at the administrative data or the billing data, what we're looking at is data that is very early in the diagnostic pathway. So it probably includes suspected cancers, and therefore it probably overrepresents the number of true cancers. And then Ontario Cancer Statistics is basically data that's accumulated based on the final visit. So once they've confirmed that it is in fact a cancer diagnosis, then they would assign a code there. And so what we wanted to do was we first looked at OHIP because that was the data that was available first. And then we moved to Ontario Cancer Statistics and looked at data there. And so the data that I'll be presenting to you is OHIP on the left and Ontario Cancer Statistics on the right. So here is the diagnostic billing these are the results for female cancer, so cervical cancer. On the left, what you can see is a linear regression analysis where we take data from 2015 to 2019 and we project out what we would expect to see over the COVID period. And so in 2020, we see a drop in billings for cervical cancer, which is beyond the confidence intervals, so probably not by chance. And then in 2021, we see almost an equal and opposite increase. And then in 2022, we see a continued increase in billing codes for cervical cancer. On the right, you can see diagnostic or actual new cases of cancer for cervical cancer. And so you see that the line has a similar slope. It's continuing up. There's a drop down in and around 2020. And then again, at the 2021 and the increase in 2022. So what we see both from the billing data and also from the confirmed cases, a similar pattern where we see a drop in 2020 and then continuing rises in 2021 and 2022. Now we look at breast cancer. You can see that the historical line is going down. And in 2020, you don't see the same drop in billing rates for breast cancer. And that's because there were a lot of initiatives put in place in Cancer Care Ontario to try and maintain screening for breast cancer over the COVID period, unlike many other cancers. But surprisingly, again, what you do see in 2021 and 2022 is this continued increase, which is beyond the likelihood of chance. On the right-hand side, you see a drop, that maybe a rise in new cancers, a slight trend upward, and then a dramatic drop in 2020, and then an increase again in 2021 and 2022. Uterine cancer, again, similar to breast cancer on the left, billing codes basically continued according to trend lines, and then an increase in 2021 and 2022, similar pattern on the right with confirmed cancers. And then ovarian cancer, you have the drop, the increase, and then the approaching trend line. But on the right-hand side, you can see that the trend line is going straight up in 2022. So unfortunately, the nature of the data is that we have this snapshot of what is happening between 2015 and 2022. We've ordered the data for up to 2020, the end of 2024, and we should be receiving it momentarily. But what we can definitely note when we look at some of these slides, especially cervical cancer, is that there's something that's going on, and there's a continued rise in cancer rates. And the other thing too that we need to remember is that you'll identify increases earlier when you're looking at administrative data, and they'll only show up a little bit later whenever you're looking at actual registry data. And that's because one of the things that occurred during the COVID pandemic, and I want to speak to this drop right here, is that cancer care was in fact suspended for the first lockdown. So even though cancer is 6 times more deadly than COVID, which is all the way down here, what we had was our public health officials, who were the designated quarterbacks for the pandemic, suspending non-emergent care. So anything that was an emergency, and basically that included all of the screening for breast cancer, the imaging, the biopsies, and everything. And so by suspending it for that first lockdown, what they did is they created backlogs in care that are continuing even to today. So that we have backlogs in detection and diagnosis, which means that even if we wanted to know the magnitude of the effect of, say, for instance, vaccination, we're probably getting an underrepresentation of what we're expecting because this non-emergent care was suspended. So for screening, this was when we actually looked at it, what we found was that there was a directive 2 that was sent out to all hospitals and physicians. And basically they said that anything that was non-emergent needed to be suspended. And this was issued 3 times over the course of the pandemic. And we have some great epidemiologists who've looked at what happened to cancer care during that time, during that especially in the 2020 period, that first lockdown. And we have 650,000 some female screenings that were missed. We have about 3,000 fewer cancer surgeries during that time, or 8,000 fewer cancer surgeries, so P2 and P4 surgeries during that time. So almost every aspect of cancer care was basically suspended. And so one of the things that we're looking into is the ethical and legal basis, whether that was actually appropriate to, because in Canada and in Ontario, you are guaranteed health services despite disability, which would be cancer, and also gender, which would be female. And so when the Directive 2 was initiated, what we found was that female visits to primary care physicians were deterred. And to diagnose female cancers, what we actually have to do is there's a cytological test for cervical cancer that needs to be done. And of course, that's with the primary care physician most often, is also a colposcopy. So especially things like cervical cancer, what we're probably looking at when we look at these figures is an underrepresentation of what is actually truly happening. And here, because there's such delays in actual diagnosis, because diagnostic capacities were suspended for almost a year, what we're probably going to see is when we look at the 23-24 data, we very well may see this continuation of the trajectory that we're seeing in the administrative data. So in terms of is there an increase in female cancers? I think that the answer would be yes. We do see net increases when you look at excess billing incidents and also excess age-adjusted mortality or incidents, which is the right-hand side. And so the question that we have as well was there a stage migration? So stage migration, as has been mentioned before, means that the cancer is presenting at a later stage than expected. And so when we look at the data here, we see that there's fewer breast cancers, and these are screened cancers. We have data for this. But basically, we have fewer breast and cervical cancers presenting in stage 1, which is when we want to find them at early cancers. And we have them presenting at later stages, particularly stage 2 for cervical cancers and even later for some of the cancers. And even though the numbers are relatively small for breast cancer, because there's so many breast cancer patients, these numbers mean are pretty significant in terms of clinical impact. We also have a study here that was done where we can see the number of stage 1 cancers, breast cancers that were normally detected when we're looking at, pre-COVID era in the 2019. And you can see that there's very few stage 4 cancers at presentation. And here what we see is more later stage. So there's fewer stage 1, 20 and 2022 than you do over here. And so again, I can't speak to whether this is turbo cancer or whether these are basically cancer left growing in the bodies of women for longer because they were unable to detect the cancers, to diagnose the cancers, and to obtain treatment for cancer, and therefore there was a stage progression. So there's a lot of questions that remain unasked that need to be investigated. We did look at the Ontario Cancer Registry did provide excess all-cause mortality. And we see that even before vaccination, there was a 4.5% increase in 2020. That's the only year that we actually have access to. And that actually some of the greatest cause of death, there's a death spike during that first lockdown. So as we see care being withdrawn from cancer patients and moved over to acute care wards where the wards remained largely empty over the COVID period, we see a spike in excess death of about 10% in April 2020. This on this side here is excellent excess all-cause mortality data from Denis Rancourt in the general population. And one of the things that we see here is there's a spike in death for the first lockdown, and we see that appearing in the cancer data. I don't actually have the data for 2021, but again, he has excess death spikes for the first booster and the second booster. And we see that among the cancer populations. You have excess death spikes during the rollout of the boosters in early 2021. Again, why this matters. In Ontario, you are to receive equitable access to services under the law, both Canadian and Ontario law. And basically, it should be based on need and availability of treatment. And so you can see, as we look through the guidelines for public health, that this was reiterated a number of times, that they needed to prioritize people according to need and availability of treatment. And what we see here is cancer services being suspended in order to prepare for potential COVID-19 patients. And so when you see something like this, you have to ask yourself, was this ethical and was this legal? In addition to the implementation, and aside from the vaccine, if cancer is more deadly, why are we suspending care for cancer patients and moving it to acute care wards? And so one of the things that we were able to do is support a fantastic group of people in Alberta to do an audit of the public health response for COVID-19 in Alberta. And one of the executives in the Alberta Health Services, which is the group that manages healthcare for the entire province, Deb Gordon testified in court and provided the outcomes for the suspension of care in Alberta. So we don't have data for Ontario, but we do have this data. And during the first wave, basically, they based their projections for what they expected to have for peak waves of COVID, which is the red. They were expecting about 2,000 patients, acute care, hospitalized COVID-19 patients, and then also about 250 ICU admittances for COVID. during that period. And what we saw was even less than 1% of that. And so what we learned immediately, or what we should have learned immediately after that first wave, is that our ability to predict COVID is off terribly. They were using Chinese data, Chinese estimates, and that we should have gone back and looked at the actual World Health Organization estimates, which was less than 1% of patients would die from COVID. And so we knew that we were dealing with something that was a lot less severe. And although they adjusted their surveillance data and their projection techniques to actual Alberta data, we can see that again and again, only a fraction of the beds that were actually put aside for COVID-19 were actually used. So here we have real cancer patients who were to receive care based on need and availability of treatment. And we removed those resources and then we sent them over to acute care wards where the evidence is that the beds remained largely empty. And so I think that this is probably one of the greatest public health, or I guess health rights violations that I've seen, that's extremely well documented. So that's the dip in 2020 was where we did the deep dive and we realized just how extensive the damage to the cancer care system was based on these suspensions that were to preserve healthcare capacity. But basically what that means is that it was to allow for healthcare capacity for potential COVID-19 patients that never materialized. So there's been lots of talk to date on the vaccine. And, you know, from a developmental point of view, this is how we usually look at things. We look at what the standard is, even for vaccines. And then we look at how much safety data was actually accumulated and collected for the COVID-19 mRNA product. And even with a normal vaccine, what you would normally get is about 10 years of development, which would be 10 years of safety data collected in various manners and shapes, and then considered hopefully by regulators, and then allowing the drug to be approved. And then what we see in the COVID-19 era, and this is probably not surprising to anybody, that we had this warp speed development of what was purportedly a vaccine, but is by all definitions, including the FDA and the EMA, a gene therapy. Now, interestingly enough, the reason why it was allowed to be developed as a vaccine is because of a declaration made in 2005, we learned from the World Health Organization. And its designation as a vaccine allowed it to circumvent the regulatory controls that are normally put in place for gene therapy, which would look at structure and concentration and biodistribution and the protein products, et cetera. So all of the extensive testing that would have normally been done for gene therapy was averted because of the designation as a COVID-19 vaccine, or as a vaccine. So one of the things that we did note also is that the emergency use authorization for the COVID-19 vaccine didn't require the normal safety assessments to be done, the preclinical safety assessments, and particularly genotoxicity and oncotoxicity. And so what we're starting to see now are studies, just like the Korean study referred to earlier by Dr. Makis, where we see a statistically significant, statistically significant increase in cancer rates among the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated. And so we have data that's administrative showing an increase in female cancers. We have data showing that there's new cancers on the rise. And then we have this data that is an integrated analysis looking at vaccination as one of the factors that could be linked to the increase in cancers, proving to be statistically significant. And so what we're doing at this stage is not only are we collecting updated data on administrative and registry data as it becomes available, but we're also going to be undertaking an integrated analysis and try and reproduce these findings in Ontario with the 16 million people that we have access to. And so we're happy to report that we've just received approval for that, and we're going to be moving forward with a study that will reproduce these findings, hopefully. And so I think the big message that we have, and the title of our campaign is "We Can Do Better," is a lot of all of this comes from the way in which we managed our public health crisis. And so we did this centralized siloed decision making, which we know doesn't work in medicine. And so what we're advocating for is a move away from a single person or group, public health officials particularly, quarterbacking a pandemic response and moving to shared decision making. And one of the main things that we saw when we audited the Alberta Task Force group was that they actually they only monitored cases. So the only thing that they were looking at is effectiveness, and they actually did not look at safety of the interventions at all. And so with a shared care model, what we would need to do is we'd need to be monitoring all aspects of an intervention moving forward. And we'd also have to have more minds in play in the decision-making process than just, a single centralized figure far, far off in the nether at the World Health Organization, directing the COVID-19 response right down to the bottom. So again, what we're looking to do at this stage is to raise awareness. And so this material, we have a video that we've prepared, which is the We Can Do Better video, and it walks through a lot of the data that I've presented today. We have a one-pager that explains the health violation that occurred for cancer patients during the COVID period, as well as extensive documentation. And we're really looking forward to being able to present our updated findings as they become available. So thanks for giving me the time to share our research with you. And that's all I have.
Well, thanks very much, Deanna. Wow, that's really shocking to see, I guess, what we all know. And, a lot of people in the audience right now, I think, are getting confirmation of what they know because they walk around town and they know people and they've been to a lot of funerals. Because people I talk to just on the street now, a lot of people are like, wow, there's so much cancer, and people are suspicious of the shots as the cause. So it's really good to, get scientists like yourself with the courage to look at the facts and explain them so that people aren't being gaslit by the same perpetrators of this entire agenda. I'd love to jump into some questions, and we've got a lot of questions from the audience. So I guess I'll have to put mine on hold and pick your brains maybe at the end or another time. But the first question I think is an interesting one. We'll try to get through a lot of questions in the time we have. So I might even kind of direct these. And I am guessing this question might be a good one to send towards our geneticist, Kevin. And what this listener's asking about is, the most of the shots given for COVID were genetic injection using nanoparticles to deliver modified RNA that ended up being loaded with a bunch of DNA adulteration, as you pointed out. But there were other genetic injections also put fraudulently before people as vaccines. And those were ones where monkey adenoviruses were used to deliver double-stranded DNA to also cause human cells to produce the toxic spike protein. And we know, for instance, AstraZeneca, which was one of those, was phenomenal at producing blood clots. But I guess the question that's coming forward is, beyond the blood clotting issues and cardiovascular events, do we have similar worries regarding cancer from the AstraZeneca DNA injections as we do with the RNA injections? And I think particularly maybe Kevin and Dr. Makis might comment on that.
Yes. So I have not looked deeply into those, mainly because they got pulled off the market before I became apprised of the DNA contamination. But I was it's interesting and sad to hear from Dr. Makis that there seems to be even a higher rate of cancer with those. So there's there is literature out there showing circulating DNA can trigger thrombosis. So it does make sense that this could be playing some role. I don't know that it's playing the entire role. The spike protein itself has its own amyloidogenic properties that could be driving this fibrin clotting cascade that people are seeing. So it's a good question. I don't have a good answer on it because a lot of those vaccines just got pulled from the market before I was really alerted to the contamination issue.
Yeah, that makes sense. We guess we don't have as big of a data swell for folks like Deanna to look at. Another question along that line is, in terms of the DNA adulteration, Was that also present in the trial lot? So, for instance, Deanna, you analyzed Pfizer's clinical trials early on, and were one of the big revealers of that. So, the question is, were the clinical trials of Pfizer, were they done using the same dirty process that was pushed on the public, or was that the clean, PCR only method of manufacturing the genetic material?
So that was PCR only for Pfizer. I don't have a good answer on Moderna because we don't have as much information on Moderna. There was an EMA leak that guided a lot of our information on Pfizer that revealed this process 1 to process 2 change. Now, there is evidence in the EMA docs that there is still even DNA contamination in process 1. It's just arguably going to be more spike and less SV40 and antibiotic resistance genes. So it's and the unique nature of the DNA in the process 1 is that it's not methylated. The PCR process strips all the methylation from that material. So the process 2 has more DNA in that there is SV40, the kanamycin gene, and all these other components in there, and it's been methylated by E. coli. So there's different risks in process 2 that were never evaluated versus process 1.
Oh, thanks very much, Kevin. Another one of our viewers today has asked us if Dr. Makis would share some of your CBD oil recommendations.
So CBD is one of these agents that is showing a possibility of shrinking tumors. Now, there is a little bit of controversy in that whether is it just pure CBD? Is it full spectrum CBD? Is THC a big factor as well? I've been working mainly with CBD and full spectrum CBD. May have some CBG as well. This is actually probably Kevin Mc Kernan's expertise more than mine. So maybe I'll let Kevin weigh in on this as well. We have some case reports showing, for example, in lung cancer, that patients who took CBD oil were able to shrink and in fact eliminate 3 to 4 centimeter tumors in a matter of months. There's been 2 case reports published like this. So this is a really exciting area of exploration, but it's still fairly new. There's a lot of work that's still to be done. But I've used CBD oil. I've used full spectrum CBD. I've used RSO. Rick Simpson oil is very popular as well. I do avoid THC, and one of the reasons is because there has been some work showing that there may be 1 or 2 cancers that might actually be stimulated to proliferate by THC. I think this has been shown in certain testicular cancers. So, I don't want to take that risk. But, CBD has been a fascinating molecule, and I think is going to be one of the key sort of repurposed agents for cancer treatment going forward.
Yeah, so there's a wealth of knowledge on this topic. There's a fascinating history here in that this is really one of the first drugs to be horse pasted, 80 years ago. It's really started in 1937 when they came out with the Marijuana Tax Act. And the U.S. pharmacopoeia back then was 75% natural products, and now it's 0. So they have systematically gone through and eliminated these things. Most people don't realize that these tinctures were the number 2 prescribed drug in 1937, and Lilly was the main provider of them. And they got replaced slowly by, one was Tylenol. Tylenol came in is actually a cannabinoid mimetic. It just comes with a toxic liver byproduct that destroys your glutathione pathway that's not present with CBD. So CBD is a much safer alternative there. In terms of use, Dr. Makis is right. There are different responses to different types of tumors. And this is well documented now. If you go to the CanMed video archive, there's about 9 years of free online videos there from scientific conferences of physicians trying to tweak different cannabinoids for different types of tumors. And it's very rare that a single cannabinoid does it all. They usually need to have a spectrum of them. And most physicians will start with the non-psychoactive ones because they're easier to dose modulate. You can put them at very high doses without any adverse events, whereas THC, some people are very sensitive to, and you can really knock them out with just 10 or 20 milligrams of that material. So they'll usually start with CBD or CBG. Some of the providers that are interesting to turn to here are the ones that became very well trusted in the pediatric epilepsy field when they were using these to dose kids with thousands of milligrams to control seizures. So Miriam's Hemp is one, Charlotte's Web, Healer.com. These are people who've been in the field for 10 or 20 years. They know how to test this material. They know how to make it clean. And there are a lot of, I wouldn't resort to any of the gas station CBD you see out there. That would be my concern. Is there is one market here that's unregulated in the United States. I don't think it's as big of an issue in Canada, but in the United States, I mean, you probably all saw this big farm bill dispute in the last government continuing resolution that happened here. They were holding up the whole government lockdown over this hemp bill, and it's because they are selling all types of synthetic cannabinoids through that system that aren't really CBD. And we don't understand the pesticide loads and the compounds that are in there. And so there has been a fair amount of contamination, I'd say, running through the smoke shop and the gas station markets that you see here. But many of the state regulated dispensaries here are forced to do testing, and they have C of A's, and you can tell that it's the purity of these compounds, and that the testing that goes on in that marketplace is more stringent than food. They've got to run them through heavy metals, pesticides, and all types of test to look for microbes. So there's a good supply chain, I think, here and in Canada for safe access to those compounds.
I just wanted to mention oleyhealth.com is a good one. OLEY health.com is a family business that I've worked with. They've been terrific. leehelps.com is another one that patients can look at. So there's a few good ones out there.
That's excellent. Thank you both for that. Another viewer is, I think, asking all of us to speculate a little bit. And they're discussing the revelation the last week that Johns Hopkins have had a patent on the use of mebendazole in treating cancerous tumors. And they're asking, what do we believe is the motive behind that? In particular, do we suspect that this is so they can shut down the use of mebendazole to protect other industries? Perhaps, William, we might start with you on that one.
Certainly. So I've put this out on Twitter and my Substack about a week or so ago, and it was picked up by Daily Mail in the UK as well. Now, this patent was granted in September 2021 to Johns Hopkins. Now, Johns Hopkins is pretty famous in the COVID era for having the pandemic counter that would count the number of cases and deaths, and we saw this big counter that basically was there to scare people every day as we saw the numbers of cases rise throughout the world. And so it's fascinating that they applied for this grant, I think back in 2015 or 16. Took a few years. It's a version of mebendazole called Polymorph C. So there's multiple versions of mebendazole. They got the one that is most active and is most promising in cancer. What's fascinating about the antiparasitics, and I've been trying to inform people of this, is that, and why they're being so heavily suppressed. Now, the cancer drug business is a huge business. In fact, it's the biggest moneymaker for big pharma, bigger than cardiac, than diabetes, blood pressure meds, blood clotting meds. The cancer drug market is about a $200 billion a year annual market. $200 billion in revenue, projected to go up to $500 billion within 10 years. And the antiparasitics are all off patent. Ivermectin is off patent, fenbendazole is off patent, and mebendazole went off patent. All three of them went off patent in the 1990s. And what's interesting is that Johns Hopkins came in, found a sort of a version of mebendazole that they could then repatent. Were granted the patent in 2021, and the patent is granted for use specifically in cancer to treat aggressive cancers like glioblastoma. And so there are now about 5 clinical trials ongoing. Now it's very quiet. You never see it in the news. You never see it advertised that this horse dewormer and horse paste and dog dewormer and various kinds of animal dewormers. That the main one of the main ones, mebendazole. There are active clinical trials ongoing for tumors, brain tumors and colon cancers as well, and brain tumors in children also. So 5 clinical trials ongoing. Now, I've looked at those clinical trials. I've looked at the way they're using them, and all but one of those trials are using very low doses. they're using 200 milligrams, they're using 400 milligrams. I use a starting dose of 1,000 milligrams, often 1,500 or 2,000 milligrams. Safety is established up to 4,000 milligrams a day. And so what I'm seeing and what I'm worried is going to happen with mebendazole was similar to what happened with ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, is that they're underdosing to give sort of a false result that it doesn't work. It doesn't work in cancer. And so they're using very low doses, which really I don't think can have an effect in cancer. So I'm very suspicious of that work that's ongoing right now. That's why what Florida is doing, allocating $65 million for research, ivermectin, mebendazole, fenbendazole research in cancer, recently allocated by Governor DeSantis and supported by Florida Surgeon General Dr. Joseph Ladapo. I think they're going to do an honest studies so that we can actually get real results that'll help patients.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you so much for that. I'd like to just, for the audience, we often talk about these medications like dog dewormer or anti-parasite. And I know a lot of people are saying, oh, cancer must be caused purely by parasites because the anti-parasite drug works. But folks, the reality is that drugs have a large number of mechanisms that can interact with all types of life form, from human cells to parasites to cancer cells. And so it's an oversimplification to say these drugs are anti-parasitic drugs. Just as it would be an oversimplification to say hammers are strictly for hitting nails, not chisels and many other things you could do with a tool. These are biomedical tools. I think we're going to, we've got lots more questions. I wish we'd get to them all, but I think we're going to pick one more question before a bit of a wrap up. And before I pick one, perhaps my co-host Christoph Blotha might have a question he personally would like to ask.
Well, I actually have quite a few, but well,
go for
it. One burning question, maybe to Kevin, because we heard the news that in terms of SV40, so the potentially cancer promoting sequence in the Pfizer lots, that they have found a higher concentration in the vials for children. Is that right?
Yes, that is right, but it's also somewhat expected in that for some reason Pfizer didn't have the pediatric doses were concentrated and they required a dilution, and many nurses didn't know this. And so if you look through VAERS, you'll find a lot of VAERS submissions for nurses who forgot to dilute, injected, and then filed a VAERS report because they failed to dilute the product. So I don't know why. If you look at the vials, like they now have a sheet that's like a choose your own adventure of what vial to give to what class of person and what color vial. It's really confusing and easy for a nurse who's having to handle all different age groups at the same time, because each one of these vials is in a single vial dose. It's like you open it and use it on one patient, and then the next patient needs a different vial. You use that one, and then you got to go back to the other lot, and oh shit, you're out of that one. Now you got to go open up a new one. It's a mess for any nurse to manage if they have a line of people at a CVS, if you have young kids and old people, to go through and pick through these lots and not make mistakes. So it is in some ways it's so sloppy that you almost wonder if it's by design. It's meant to create human error. So yeah, those pediatric doses did have twice the amount, but that's because we didn't dilute them when we got them. We took them and just injected them as is without dilution, and of course they're twice as concentrated. And we look at the vial and it says yes, you need to dilute this twofold before giving it, and then we go into VAERS and see that many people made the same error. They have been injecting these into children at twice the concentration.
Another thing I wanted to mention briefly is that there's been hundreds of reports over the last 2-3 years of parents taking children to vaccine clinics to get a flu shot, and then they accidentally get a COVID shot instead. And in fact, in some of these cases, they got the adult dose COVID shots. Yeah. And these were small kids. Some of these kids were 4, 5, 6 years old. There's been many reports of this. There's lawsuits ongoing. This happened throughout Canada. It also happened in the United States.
Yes. Yeah. So an important point there is the adult dosage for Pfizer, I think, is 30 micrograms, and for Moderna is 100. And they do lower that for the pediatric dose, but for some reason they deliver it in a concentrated form where you have to dilute it to get to, I can't remember if it's 5 or 10 micrograms, but it's a lower amount of RNA because the person's of a lower weight, but they deliver it in a more concentrated form. So if you forget to dilute it, you end up getting what's more like an adult dose.
I mean, before we wrap up for tonight, we could maybe ask all of you for a final comment, what you see, because when we know that there's an intervention now with 28, as Professor Karina Acevedo, Whitehouse, reported 2 weeks ago, as potential causation for a cancer by these shots. And usually cancer takes 10, 20, 30 years to develop, and we're now seeing this after a few years. Well, maybe what's your prognosis and what's your summary of the evening? Maybe we'll start with ladies first. Yeah, Deanna.
I think it's very concerning. And I think that the level of censorship has been discussed by my other panelists is very concerning in the sense of getting good science out there to solve this problem. I am myself encouraged that there is a growing number of medical oncologists who are starting to wake up and see the problem with this data and join me in researching it. So I'm encouraged by that. And I can just only hope that reality strikes at some point and we realize that we're in a crisis and we finally give up the illusion that we're not and start to look for some real answers. So that's my hope moving forward.
Thanks. Kevin?
Well, I'm at least hopeful that there has been some administrative changes here in the States that are paying more attention to this than the prior. Obviously, everyone wants it to go faster than it's currently going, but I haven't seen administration do as much as RFK's done. So it would be worse if he weren't around. I'm certain of that. So there's promise there. The ACIP committee is being they're attentive to this. They've reached out to me and multiple other colleagues about what they can do about this and what resources and references they should be reading. So there is a team in there that's trying to get the right thing done. I don't know how much they can do. Who knows? We'll find out. It is a very immovable swamp, it seems, but there's hope there, at least, that there's change happening and people are now starting to listen. It has not made its way out into the rest of the scientific community, unfortunately. I think that is, I agree with Deanna there, that there does seem to be a bit of a guilt or a spell bound upon people that this can't be true. Otherwise, it implicates too many of us for having looked the wrong way for 5 years. But there are alternatives, and I think I'm glad Dr. Makis is here and others speaking about these alternatives, because I do think it's time that we start resorting to those more, because they've been used throughout history, and they were systematically eliminated from the pharmaceutical supply chain for reasons that I don't think were very valid. And we're now finding that these holistic approaches are probably they need our attention, and then we need to revisit them.
Thanks. William?
I think we can all agree that these shots should be taken off the market immediately. And I think many of us have been calling for that for years now. I particularly am concerned about children. In Canada, we've had over 3 million children injected with at least one of these shots. And the recommendations are to continue injecting these children with booster shots. This has to stop. At the very least, we should be able to protect children from this. My big concern is, in terms of cancer, is that seeing so much of these aggressive cancers in young people, and the ages are getting younger and younger and younger. Now, you're seeing young kids, 15-year-old kids with colon cancer, with ovarian cancer. This is an absolute tragedy, and we're going to need screening. We're going to need to identify who's at risk. We're going to need blood tests for spike protein and spike antibodies to see who's still producing spike, who's at risk of these cancers. What the medical establishment has done so far is, in a way, what the schools have done with the defibrillators, right? Instead of addressing the problem of the myocarditis and the heart attacks, they've installed defibrillators in every school. With the cancer screening, what I'm seeing is they've shifted the age for screening. For example, for breast cancer screening, the age has been shifted from 50 to 40. The recommendations are now to start screening younger at age 40. There's talk about changing the screening recommendations for colon cancer from 50 to as low as 30. So instead of getting a colonoscopy at 50 plus, now there's talk of it reducing it down to 30 plus. But that's not an answer. We need the problem to be properly identified, studied. We need to identify who the people are at risk so that we can diagnose them earlier at stage 1 or 2 than at stage 4, which is what's happening right now.
Thanks. Mark?
Well, first, I'm very grateful for our experts today. I think in terms of, some of the comments and questions are sort of like, wow, this is really complicated science, but how do we break it down for the common man? So I'll try to do that as an old-fashioned ER doc. Friends, there's no benefit to these COVID shots. They make you more likely to get COVID. And that's just the beginning of all the ways they can cause cancer, destroy your immune system, etc. So don't wait for someone in some old order government to tell you not to stick these needles in your kids or yourself. Just stop. Even the old-fashioned actual vaccines, complete with mercury and aluminum, have negative efficacy. We could see that with the flu shots. Recent study on 50,000 healthcare workers. 27% more likely to get the flu in 5 weeks after you take a COVID or flu shot if you take it. So number one thing, folks, stop rolling up your sleeves. Stop sticking needles in yourself. Follow the information you're getting from good organizations like the World Council for Health. Optimize your vitamin D. Live a healthy lifestyle. Live clean. If you have cancer or someone you have has cancer, the first thing that you should do is the first thing you should do for every single thing in life, which is don't panic. Take a breath and think. Because before you're led down the path to destruction by a system which has clearly gone from bad to worse, you want to take advantage of the kind of expertise that we're bringing to you. There are other options, and it's going to take some courage. And lastly, I'd like to speak to the practitioners out there, the doctors, nurses, scientists in the world, who you may be still keeping your head down and quietly going along with the herd while people are being led to slaughter. And to you, I would say, please take a moment. And, one of the better way principles is we are spiritual people. We are spiritual beings. It's not all just science, math, and economics. And so please find a heartfelt moment, get out in the woods, get in church, get in your mosque, wherever you can, and think about it. And stop bowing to money and join us at the World Council for Health on this mission to deliver real health, real happiness, and a real future for humans everywhere in the world. And Christoph, I'm so grateful to be a part of this with you. And I'd love to pass the mic over to you to wrap things up, sir.
Well, thanks, Mark. Well, in terms of solutions, you just mentioned it because that's one of the solutions. That's one of the big aims of the World Council for Health. So, please feel free. Dr. Makis just mentioned it. We should find ways to identify the loads of spike proteins. There are protocols that you can download from the World Council for Health, the Spike Protein Detox Guide. There's also a cancer and metabolic disease guide that you can have to be inspired. Look for people like Dr. Makis that show you the non-invasive ways, as Ken was saying. They have been out there for many, many years, but it's one of the biggest industries. Vaccines, I would include, in the medical field, and just become cautious. There are so many wonderful projects at the moment. Dr. Marek just published a wonderful report, a peer-reviewed study on ways to halve your risk of getting cancer in your life. It's simple intervention that calm down inflammation. Green tea, omega-3s, and other nutraceuticals you can have. There's advice on how, on your diet and on many other things. There has been an incline in the rates of cancer for quite a while, but it's getting steeper and steeper and steeper, and it probably will increase. Even the oncology community says that now one in every second adult is going to have it at one stage in their lives, and soon everybody will have it. Yeah. So no matter what the circumstances are, no matter what your inventions aware that you've been taken, and Mark, you said it, it's a matter of trust. Don't go into fear. And in case you haven't realized, a study has just come out that showed this virus that apparently appeared was clearly genetically engineered with patent of that you can actually follow up on the internet. This intervention that was created included cancer promoting things that weren't actually announced to the official boards, as Kevin Mc Kernan was able to show in the Pfizer trials. This is a clear deceit and actually a crime in itself. And we can see now all the data disappearing. New Zealand, unfortunately, has just lost most of the data. Australia has decided to scrap most of the data. And the UK now at the moment doesn't want to release the data, not to cause fear in the population. So start to think whether these are just a few conspiracy theorists that are talking that something very suspicious has happened here and is still happening. And in these terms, thank you so much for your presence here, Deanna and Kevin, and to William, who has just left us for another meeting, and of course to our not lonely warrior, because you're just too powerful to be lonely, and you're far too popular in radiating authenticity, Mark. So thank you very much to all of you. And as always, we close with a little song, and hand it over to Mark, our tech specialist, in order to play that out for you. So good night to all of you, and thank you very much for your attention. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Christoph.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Welcome to the herd, and who has never been to a choir session before? What? What's wrong with you? Why did it take so long? Please welcome to the stage, Mr. Rufus Wainwright.
Bathing on the Thank you for watching this episode of Better Way today. If you found value in it, please consider making a value exchange with us. The World Council for Health is a grassroots people's organization, and we rely on funding from people just like you. Your contributions from as little as $5 or £5 or 100 Rand help to power our work. The World Council for Health team is on a mission to serve you. Please make it your mission to support us. Thank you.